today. I hope you guys all doing well. Really nice seeing you all. Yes, obviously I was stalking you in chat. Big thanks for joining us today. Me and Johnny today going to be talking about what's with the war in Ukraine. Johnny, if you don't know, is another pro-Ukrainian. I don't even know how to call these genre of videos, like observer, overviewer. Like I don't have a good word for it. But basically, a person that covers the news. I wanted to say reporter, but like reporter is basically the person that reports from the fields. It's a person that looks at the map and talks. That's let's put it like, let me not oversell what I'm doing here. I'm mostly doing the same thing. So and commentator, perfect, thank you. Yes, commentator. So another commentator on the war in Ukraine. So we will be commenting together. We will be talking to each other. It's gonna be my probably last collab for a while. I've kind of dedicated last month, if you've been following closely, to do a lot of collabs with a lot of people. And I love collabs, but they're taking a lot of effort. So potentially I will cut down. Like I just wanted to kind of push for a month and see how it goes. And it's just a lot of effort. And I want to concentrate, on following the war, because otherwise evening that I could spend, studying, trying to get information on the battlefield, I'm actually dedicating to talking with people. And I love talking with people, don't get me wrong, especially with such an amazing commentators like Johnny. But it's an evening that basically I don't have time to either spend with my wife or follow the war in Ukraine, which is kind of the primary job of my here, because I really want you to be aware of the situation on the battlefield. So let me just connect to Johnny and see if he is there, and then we will jump in together. All right. So enter. Yes, he's definitely here. All right.
Hey!
Hey, Johnny. Are you good? Are you hearing me good? Let me see.
I can hear you perfectly. I was just starting to panic there,
That
but panic
is,
over.
yeah, sorry. We just finalized everything. Let me just find where's the right window, because I remember I prepared the window for you to be here, but
Yep.
is it this one? Yeah, it is. There we go. Mini Johnny. So, guys, on my chat. So please don't be surprised that on my stream you will have Mini Johnny, because we kind of try to connect with Johnny and try to align our cameras so it works. And basically, it's either this or Johnny's viewers on his channel will see him twice, and then the second version of him is going to be also delayed, so it's going to be really awkward. So just to kind of,
Yeah.
because let's be honest, guys, on my stream you are very much aware and used to stuff on my channel being kind of awkward, so having a mini Johnny is like the least of things that can happen here.
I'm just gonna go live into my guys as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure, go. Oh, you're not live. I mean, like, people from my
No.
chat are already saying hi to you. Everyone is loving you.
Hello.
Everyone is really wanting to hear more from you.
Oh, that's great, Georgie. Well, welcome to my guys. I've just come online. Georgie has been live for a little bit. I am in a very small. I have a very small face on Georgie's screen, but on my screen, Georgie and I we are of equal facial value. So that's fantastic,
Yes.
mate. I really appreciate you agreeing to do this. I guess for my viewers, and hey, let's face it, my viewers, I've got far fewer viewers than you have. But do you want to introduce yourself a little bit for those who might not know
Yeah.
you?
Just let me be awkward for a second, because I forgot to turn off the light, and I forgot that in studios I need to have the lights set up. It's because it's still day. I'm not used to work during the day. Usually it's the evenings. But yeah, I mean, like, if you guys from the Johnny's channel, I think I'm reading your comments. Firstly, I'm gonna stalk your chat. Like, so if you think that you're gonna write something in Johnny's chat and I'm not gonna see it, I will. So don't try to hide it. But yeah, I'm Georgie. I'm running a Ukraine Matters YouTube channel. I'm an accidental YouTuber. I started this to basically help cover the war for like two of my friends that were just in Denmark, and since then it just somewhat kind of exploded a bit, and now we're doing cool stuff. We're gathering help for the Ukrainian military. We are trying to support the Ukrainian military, and we're trying to unite a lot of people that are supporting Ukrainian forces and so on to help promote support for Ukrainian military so they can win the war, and then our channels can no longer get the viewers or numbers that we want. Perfect. We're working
That
towards ending our career, basically.
it's such a strange thing, and I have to admit this. I have these moments of like, first of all, I have these moments of moral s- explosion in my head where I'm like, right, what am I doing here? Because I'm reporting on the war and I've got this growing YouTube channel. And is it exploiting the war? But no, it's no more than a mainstream news channel would report the news on the war. And I have this obsession. I'm a philosopher, I'm a political journalist. This is right in my wheelhouse in terms of what I love. As in, I don't love war, but I'm really interested in how this works and how politically it works. And I've become obsessed with it. But at the same time, with a growing kind of YouTube channel, I'm like, oh, and then also what happens after the war ends? I want this war to end tomorrow. But then, of course, we're going to have to think about other things to talk about, but hopefully much more pleasant things than a war, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it's not even a big discussion because what are these notifications that I'm getting? I don't know. Anyway, yeah. Uh, Basically, for me, it's not even a choice, right? If someone says like, "Hey, if the war ends tomorrow, would you be okay like losing everything, like no more channel, no more follower?" I would like not even blink an eye. I would say yes, because
Yeah.
for me, I mean, it's it's in the name. The Ukraine is what matters, not me, not my well-being, not my channel, nothing like that. And I think that's why I'm blessed that I have such an amazing people like Ali, Lisa, and so many other channels channels. I mean, like people that are following and helping me out. Uh, I couldn't be doing this with so much support from the people, especially like recently we kind of talked about them sending emails. I'm not sure if you're talking with your community, but my community is very active in sending me emails, and I hear so much about their personal stories about like what people are doing, and I feel a little bit ashamed that I'm not always responding in time. But people are super passionate about it, and they're super thankful that they're able to rely on me. And for example, a lot of them didn't know how they could support Ukrainian military, and now they know because we were able to verify a lot of stuff. So, but sorry for devolving. Maybe you had something else in mind.
Well, as I find that really interesting. So, in terms of a YouTube channel, I've done a very rare thing possibly in YouTube channels and their communities, which is I spend for so much time interacting with my community in the comment threads and actually getting involved in conversations, or rather having email conversations. I do it at the coalface, but in that way, I've curated a community and actually get to feel like you know some of these people, and created a community whereby there's some really amazing expertise. People who've got military expertise, economic expertise, political expertise, and I learn as much from the comments as they do from the stuff I talk about. So it's really fantastic interaction I have, and I'm sure. I mean, your channel is gazillions times bigger, so you're going to get that times a gazillion, right?
Not really. Like, I mean, my channel is relatively small. Like, whenever I think about the size of my channel, to be honest, I look at a lot of the bullshit channels. Like a lot, I look at channels that are covering like the war from an angle that has like nothing to do with reality, right? And I'm here barely squeezing out the numbers that can maybe make them laugh a bit, because the nonsense that they're spouting about, like all of these, oh, we got in 3 days 5,000 Ukrainians have died because of their attacks in the south, without even putting any kind of like thought into what does that even actually mean, of 5,000 Ukrainians dying, and stuff like that. And that just I don't know. I don't feel that my channel is kind of big. I don't feel that the numbers is what matters. Ukraine
Yeah.
matters.
Oh no,
I'm
absolutely.
not
And
gonna have
speaking of
time
those,
to making that pun. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And do you mind if I share something? So I won't share the map. I want to share this, which is Putin has apparently spoken today, and Chris Owicki on Twitter has given a translation of what Putin has said. I think this might be of interest to you and kind of what you're talking about with those fanciful figures. So Putin said, and this is a rough translation and praise here what he says. Some public figures say we need to mobilize about 1 million more. I'd be interested to see what you think about mass mobilization of the Russian public. It depends on what we want, he says. There is no need for additional mobilization today. And he goes on to say there are no plans to send conscripts to special military operations zone. There is no such need. As for the return home of the mobilized, the law does not provide for specific deadlines. It's interesting, keep them there as long as possible. It will have to be based on the development of the situation. And then this is where it gets interesting with the figures. The Ukrainian counteroffensive is a large scale and uses trained reserves. It has been going on since June the 4th and is continuing right now. And Putin then says Ukrainian losses amount to 25 to 30% of the equipment delivered. During the offensive, the Ukrainians have lost more than 160 tanks and more than 360 armored vehicles of various types. This is just what we are seeing. What do you have to say to that kind of talk from Putin himself?
I mean, like, I'm not sure why you're saying Putin himself like it's some kind of authority or any kind of any kind of valuable insight over there that is relevant to the conversation. I mean, for me, that man, and whatever he's the sounds that are he's producing from his mouth hole mean very very little. So okay, sure, whatever. He makes sounds. He can be making fart sounds, and that's about the same value. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking about Putin. It's not really valuable whatever he's saying, right? Because like let's be honest, the only one people what people want to hear from Putin, and the only thing that they are like kind of looking into his mouth hole and like trying to not hear him say is anything about nuclear weapons. Everything else doesn't really matter. Like everything else, people just like yeah, whatever, what, like it's fine, it's fine. Did he say anything new about nukes? That's literally where it comes down to. That's pretty much it. Everything else is fluff. It's like media story speculation, to kind of entertain the audience. That's what they do. But when we get to the kind of real information and valuability of that information, then whatever Putin says by this point is completely irrelevant because it just isn't.
It's interesting the whole nuke thing. I mean, what a subject! It's a huge subject. Obviously, the potential of apocalyptic, ending of the world was for a long time in this war something that got political heads particularly worried. That was the red line. But it seems the further we've gone on in this war, the more the leaders of the allied nations have realized that that is an empty threat from Putin and that he isn't going to press the red button. And now you're seeing, first it was things like howitzers, then it was main battle tanks, and then it was airframes and all the bits in between. There seems to be no red line. I mean, what are your thoughts on whether there's realistically a chance of being any kind of nuclear, usage?
No, I don't think so because Putin is a coward. He is really afraid for his life, his own personal life. He obviously is a like ex KGB, so he's able to like play it cool. But he also we know that he tries to live in his world of like good news and so on. So he's devolved from reality. Like when people like talk about Putin, they don't understand that 99%. Like if you're reading news on the internet, you are more informed than Putin is. Putin does not read the
Yeah.
news on the internet. He does not use internet. He does not know how to use a computer, a PC. Putin does
Mhm.
not use a computer. Like for him, it's a technology that's invented by the USA. It's a technology that like is completely is there just to spy on you, and the internet is completely like he gets his information spoon fed to him by people that are invested in him seeing a very specific worldview. So while they pounder to his like what do we say self-preservation like potential, they will not be delivering really bad news to him. So I'm pretty sure up until the end of the war he will be winning everything until it's going to be falling apart. And using nukes is just basically like he's dead. Like the world leaders have told him with no kind of back thought that if he uses nukes, he's a dead man. That's it. And most importantly, it was delivered to him also by representatives of India and China. And those are kind of the two things that really matter. Don't get me wrong, Americans matter, but I think Putin still believes that they are some kind of superpower comparison, like this is our adversary, right? But when he's talking about China, that's like, okay, we're almost totally dependent on China.
Well, yeah, and this is something I've talked about quite a lot, and I'm really interested in everything you just said there, because that the stuff about the information chamber that he lives in is so important. Like, I don't think people realize this enough out there, and perhaps even in the mainstream media, that Putin doesn't have a smartphone. He doesn't use the internet. He thinks the internet is a CIA, a tool of the CIA. So when any other leader is told something by their you know by their advisors, the realization is that information is being curated for me. Right, how do I verify that? I go and speak to someone else, but then they're just giving me information. Right, how can I kind of independently verify that or disconfirm that? I go to the internet. We will do it. As soon as someone says something bonkers to you, you go, right, I'm getting on Google and I'm finding out that's true. Right, if you can't do that, you are victim to whatever is being told to you by those people, and you are going to have to go to those people to verify whether those people are telling you the truth or not. He's living in a really dangerous place for him, and that's why they end up invading in the first place, because he just had bad information. But sorry, there's a lot of me talking, but the other point I want to mention is China. You mentioned China, and they are, I think they are not up for Putin pressing the red button, predominantly, my opinion, speculation here, because they own perhaps up to 15% of Ukrainian agricultural land. So they have 50-year leases on a lot of, yet one company bought 9% of Ukraine's agricultural land, just one company. So if you're going to have nuclear warfare on that land, you're not going to have the crops to feed your population, that kind of long-term sustainability, and B, you're going to ruin that going forward because you'll be radiating the land. So China, I think that's one of the reasons they're not up for that.
I think it's a how do we say, it's a what was the word, the not complex but the maybe combined, it's basically it's a stack of reasons, right?
Yeah,
Obviously,
not.
I don't think that land interest, China and Ukraine, is like on the surface. I think that China has many other options for land, and Ukraine is not really like this. I believe that the main reason was that China doesn't want the strong West. China wants the Western allies to be weak. China wants Western powers to be destabilized. China wants Europe to be not very good buddy buddies with the US. They want essentially to have the West bigger than themselves, while China builds power, becomes like a unstoppable juggernaut of the economy, and so on. Right now, they're in very vulnerable position. They are extremely dependent on the world economy. That's a kind of big difference. Like whenever we're talking about, well, can China become a second Russia? Yes and no, because with the dictatorial regimes, there is always this, like, we look at what's happening right now in Putin, and right now dictators currently sitting there, they're looking at what Putin has done and what has the response been, and they're like, oof, yeah, that's pretty bad. I should have done it. You give it additional 5-10 years, and then not Putin, but the dictators will look at what Putin did, and then I was like, I could have done better. I could have done better. I just need a little bit more resources. I just needed to, like, I will learn from his mistakes. And then I will start repeating the same shit again. So what we will see is basically kind of the same pattern repeating from China. China will realize that they're right now very much dependent on the Western economies, and they're going to start slowly, if not decoupling, then putting us in the positions where it's the Western powers that will lose more than the China itself. And that's kind of their goal. They've been quite transparent on it.
I don't think China are particularly ideologically concerned. So if you were to think about nothing else other than their kind of political outlook, this idea of communism in China, which is already a kind of bastardized version of that anyway, and then you look at the Russian political system. Yes, they are aligned in some kind of way, but it's not like China are ideologically concerned about this war. I think they have a purely utilitarian outlook, which is to say, right, what do we gain most from? And in fact, and I'll be interested to see what you think about this, Georgie, but I think that China will gain more if Russia loses this war than if Russia wins. And so, therefore, I don't think they mind particularly whether they lose or win, because if Russia fall apart and lose this war and it all goes wrong, then China will be able to walk in and say, "Hey, you're our mates. We kind of supported you. We'll help you get up on your feet, and we'll help ourselves to these hydrocarbons, and we'll have some of these eastern regions. We've already got use of Vladivostok port. We've shoehorned that into our uh, outlook, so on and so forth." And I think China will gain if Russia loses more than they will actually gain, arguably, than if they win. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, there are like both scenarios is a win-win for China. There is and the
Yeah.
size of that win, it's a debatable topic. Like what is it going to be more or less? The important part, obviously, if Russia loses, then China is uh, is less sure about the situation of with Taiwan. China loses the growing kind of triangle, the power triangle, Russia, Iran, China. So that one a little bit falls apart. Um, and basically they lose a lot of influence on the Western powers. Like so, the Western powers can essentially unite themselves because let's be honest, right now we're basically like how do we say like systematic challenge. It's been like Putin has thrown a systematic challenge to the Western powers. So when Ukraine wins this, it's going to be the Western powers that are going to be saying we win. So it's going to be essentially like a cultural moral dominance. So China will be on the back foot on that front. But on the other hand, I agree with you that they will win a lot of like land and they will lay a lot of claim on Russia, Russia or anything that is on that territory after this war. If Russia falls apart, I don't really care. But China can influence a lot of control, like it's doing already on the Middle Asia. So, and a lot of Middle Asia basically becomes like a Chinese pet playground. All of the local small dictators, because like Middle Asia is pretty much dictator on top of dictator, and so on. And they're becoming Chinese puppets. So China becomes like a very, 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 very strong regional power and a very, very, very major kind of global power as well. On the other hand, if we essentially Ukraine loses for some reason, I don't know how, but Russia takes over Ukraine. It completely diminishes, like, I don't know, the block of Europe falls apart. For example, let's say some leader like Trump comes to power where he says, okay, we're not supporting Ukraine anymore. Then there is some kind of, I don't know, France, Le Pen comes to power, says French doesn't support. I don't know, Germany also pivots and so on. And then we had the Eastern powers such as Poland, Baltics that are and Nordics that are completely like what do I say furious at Russia, is saying that this is our liberty. We see Europe falling apart. We see the cross ocean negotiate power collaboration falling apart. In that sense, the China wins again. In a sense that they have a very strong ally in Russia. They have this axis of evil of Russia, Iran, and China being completely proponed, and they have significantly destabilized West. So it's a major victory on that side. So there is a very hard to find a bad scenario for China. So the only bad scenario is if the European powers would accept the overview of China, what US does right now, and understand that it's an adversary, and we would start really decoupling process of the European and the world economics from China to become an independent. Then we get into like a basically a worldview against a worldview situation that is problematic for China. But we see that this is not happening in the Europe. Like Europe is not ready. Europe is not solid on that, and money still talks.
Yeah, and China recognise that, and they know that they're arguably on the edge of an economic precipice. There's talk about their population being, rather than being a pyramid as they used to be, which is fewer older people as they die off. Now with the burgeoning middle class, there's more older people not working. They have to be supported by those further down the age kind of pyramid, but it's more like that. And so, that's a real challenge to their economic output going forward. There's all the stuff to do with their property and loads of stuff. So there's been a lot of talk about China being on the edge for many years now, but that seems to have gathered momentum. And I think they know that, they should know that. And they will be looking at how the world is reacting to Ukraine in terms of what they do with Taiwan. Some people in America are saying we should be spending more money on sorting out Taiwan rather than Ukraine. Well, actually, no. The best way to solve Taiwan is for Ukraine to win, because if Ukraine win, China don't go near Taiwan. But they will be looking, if they have sanctions in China, then that is going to be catastrophic for their economy. So they're going to be looking out for that.
Yeah, I agree. But people in my chat are kind of already right that this we're slowly like pivoted to China without even talking kind of the main points. Like me sitting here with the Ukrainian flag and starting discussing China. So if we go
Sure.
back to Ukrainian war, then I think like kind of to round it all up, I think you're absolutely right. The point of China is to resolve the Taiwan conflict, because we can go into the geopolitical confrontation with China and how it would evolve is nice, but we know that if Ukraine loses this war, then war around Taiwan is pretty much inevitable. So the best way to prevent
Yeah.
that is really to get everything that Ukraine needs, and Ukraine is getting what it needs. I already kind of talked with my chat, well, not my chat, but my community about this, and I truly believe that as soon as the first airframes from F-16 or F-18 from Australia, I believe they have like 41 that they are looking like Hornets to kind of put them somewhere, and Ukraine has sent an official request for them right now. So potentially Ukraine will get both F-16s and F-18 Hornets to support their operations, and that's a massive improvement, because the numbers that I'm hearing is very easily from 50 to 150. That is a major air power. That is a major game changer, because the most important, the most problematic right now, right? People that this comment on Ukraine, they say, "Oh, Ukraine has trained with NATO forces, therefore it's good, because now they know how NATO fights, so now they can defeat Russia how NATO does." The problem is Ukraine cannot fight like NATO fights. Ukraine, like NATO, in the first like half a year, 9 months, it was actually Ukraine trying to explain to NATO countries that they cannot fight this war like NATO fights their wars, because they don't have the airframes, they don't have the capabilities, they don't have the unity, they don't have it. They have the old kind of Soviet military, and they're in a situation that they just don't have the time to rebuild it or prepare it. So it's a little bit silly than just accept, and it's like say, "Oh well, okay, like just give us our weapons and then we magically transform." It's like how do you say, like we just spin the magic wand, put a tap on your head, and then everything kind of magically change into NATO uniforms and so on. But Ukraine cannot. And giving the last kind of piece of that puzzle, the main NATO capability, the air power, is what gonna start the transition to the way NATO fights fights its wars. So I think it's major.
But you're absolutely right there, because the issue is, and Justin Bronx talked about this from Royal United Services Institute, so talking about how they Ukraine can't fight as NATO. So you can give them NATO airframes, but they can't do the NATO warfare, because to use those airframes as NATO would use them, you'd have to have months worth of suppression of enemy air defenses, destruction of enemy air defense operations that would take place. So if NATO were going to go into a conflict, right, you would spend months taking out air defenses first, creating air superiority, and that's how you then would introduce your airframes once you've already got that air superiority. Well, you can't do that now. We're in the middle of the war, and those air defense systems are still in place, and Russia have arguably the air superiority or air advantage. And in terms of the fact that they've got munitions on their planes, so the key to the NATO airframes is the fact that they can fire missiles that have greater range than the Russian missiles. But they're having to start in the middle of the war rather than laying things out from the beginning and preparing for the introduction of the airframes, if you see what I mean. So it will be a challenge nonetheless.
Oh, absolutely, but I'm pretty sure Ukraine is up to the challenge.
Oh yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
have proven everyone that they are more than capable. All of the one of the most infuriating talking points was like, oh, it's too difficult for Ukrainians to learn. It's going to take too much time. Every single time with no difference, it's been, yep, Ukraine just comes, gives it a couple of months, they got the hang of it. Cool.
Yeah.
So all the
I,
times and so on.
I don't think it's a challenge in training. I'd absolutely agree with you 100%. The challenge for the Ukrainians in terms of taking on a bunch of new airframes is destroying enemy air defenses. The Russians still have fairly decent enemy air defenses, and they need to be absolutely eliminated. And then you can start bringing those airframes closer and being able to do their thing. And that for me would be the big challenge. Um, Talking about I'm just going to share this. So we've seen some vehicles that have been lost already in the counter-offensive in terms of Bradley. So there's a lot of talk, the Russians talking about, oh, we've taken out something like 13% of Bradleys or whatever. I don't think many people, obviously your audience and mine probably do, because we might have talked about it, but the Americans, for example, and I don't know if all of these are in America, whether that's how many they've made. I don't know if they own all these or they're in warehouses. The US has 6,723 Bradleys, right? And we've heard today that they're going to give some more Bradleys to replace those that have been lost, but that's like 15 Bradleys and 10 Strikers. The US could simply go, here's 1,000 Bradleys, and Russia would have absolutely no answer to that. So as long as those crews are surviving in those vehicles, there is, and as long as US are on board, and it is annoying possibly for them that we're relying so much on the US in terms of the fact that they have the most. Uh, there is a big pot to draw from. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, absolutely, and we saw this exactly. We saw the 47 Brigade that suffered like the most, at least what Russia has been showing. Like, I'm not sure if I think people on my channel already know, but is that Russia just showed the same kind of column of these Bradleys being like just caught in this trap in this whole offensive where they just got destroyed. Couple of Leopard tanks, couple of Bradleys, and they've firstly, what I was surprised that there was no bodies there. I was surprised that there was
Yeah.
no injured, no bodies around that area, like almost completely. And today there came a video from a chief sergeant of the 47th Brigade, a very famous. Like a military guy. He was like a grunt during the 2014. Yeah, exactly him. He was a
That would
grunt. Yeah, he was a grunt in 2014. So his name is Valery Marcus, or I'm not sure which name was is correct. But the point is, he said that like it's all nonsense. That like it's hard fighting, but what they did, they tried to attack, yes. So they got into a trap, yes, but they got the guys out, and they almost sustained no casualties in personnel. Vehicles got lost, sure, but that's what they're for. Like that's whole their point. With regards to deliveries, you mentioned Ukraine. US has 6,000 vehicles, and that's true. That's very true. And the problem is that why they don't just deliver 1,000 Bradleys is because it's not just the vehicles that matter. Because what I've learned over the year of fighting, I'm not a military guy. I'm just like a normal person that living their life. So for me, it was everything was new. Everything was new. So what I've learned over the year is that it's not just the number of people fight. If it's just a mob, it's not going to do that well. And it's the same kind of with the force of equipment. We saw at the beginning of war, Russia sent so many tanks. Did it do any good? Not really. So to operate large scale equipment, like heavy equipment, they need trained large scale groups, because a company of Bradleys requires a lot of personnel to handle them. Like it's technicians, it's supplies, it's a crew, it's a secondary crew, it's everything around it. It's also like the people that is inside those Bradleys, so they know the tactics, they know how the vehicle works, they know how to operate. It's kind of huge ecosystem around that specific capability. So when we're talking, okay, US will just replace the Bradleys, yeah, cool, because the crews survived, because 47 Brigade said we sustained almost no casualties in manpower because Bradleys are so good, because They are amazing because people inside of those Bradleys, they get a mine, they get a couple of artillery shells in, they get a tank shot in, and everyone survives with a little bit of a headache. Amazing, amazing
Yeah,
vehicles.
yeah, and this guy, I mean, actually, the Bradleys aren't even the best defensively. Like, and there's still survivability for the troops in there. So these NATO vehicles are super important because you're right, it takes time to train. So when we've seen, I talk about this a lot with airframes. When we see Russian jets and helicopters taken out, it's not so much. Yeah, they can replace those helicopters and jets. I mean, they do have a large number of them, but they don't have a large number of trained pilots. And so you lose one or two pilots, depending on what the airframe is, then that is many years of training that you can't suddenly just get like that. So the survivability for the people inside these things is super important for them getting them back behind lines, getting them back on some new vehicles that are being fed through, as the US in this example are able to replace. What this chap said, as you correctly referenced, is that he claimed they'd only lost 5 soldiers. Now, I have seen a Russian video of some dead soldiers by those Bradleys, but he claims that the Ukrainians lost only 5 people, and yet the Russians are claiming they lost 350. And that was Putin's claim earlier, saying they've lost, all these vehicles and all this and all these people, partly referencing the fact that they claim to have killed 350 Ukrainians. He's saying it's literally 5. Again, whether you can trust him, but he seemed, a lot more trustworthy than the Russian MOD, right?
He's a very straight shooter, this guy. Like he made like a whole book about the war. He was very very open about the state of Ukrainian military during 2014. So obviously, I'm pretty sure there are some protocols on what he can and can't disclose. Like it's a kind of his baby, the 47 Brigade. He was one of the co-founders. But generally speaking, like his attitude is like we need to look in the eye into problems that we're having because that's how we improve. So that's why like I just know his record. Like I've followed him quite
Yeah.
quite closely over how he did. Like he became super famous in Ukraine, like incredibly, because he was the one that went when Gherkin, the person that started 2014 war, the war criminal. By the way, a lot of time, like I hear in the Western media, they reference Gherkin, and then they forgot to ask that he's a convicted war criminal. Like it's
Yeah,
he's a
of
war
course.
criminal that's literally has like there is a prison cell that is waiting for him, not like a metaphorically speaking, but like literally he's a convicted felon. And so this Gherkin, he was in Slovyansk, and it was this guy, the person in the video, Brigade, that came into Slovyansk to kick Gherkin out. So when Gherkin ran from that city of Slovyansk in 2014 with all his troops and all his talk, and he just completely tried to escape because the Ukrainians were coming. The Ukrainians that were coming was this guy and the other people, and he was a grunt, but he was doing a video reporting from that time.
It's also worth pointing this out as well. So this has come out today, a video to show. I think is it 2 of those, at least one of those leopards that was apparently taken out in that exchange near Orikhiv, uh, being towed back. So that tells you a couple of things. One, these things are fixable. Get them back, get them fixed up, and back onto the front line. Brilliant. What's the Russian capability of that? So whenever I see anything, any bit of data, my question in my head is, what does this look like with the Russians? So when you see a bunch of vehicles get blown up, like the Bradleys getting taken out, you say, right, can Ukraine replace them? Okay, when we see them getting taken out by the Russians, can Russia replace them? So I think that's really important. But also it speaks to the fact that Ukrainians must have then advanced past that position in order to be able to retrieve those vehicles. So I think there's 2 things we can learn from that.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I'm most excited for right now is Ukraine has captured in a prime condition, like undamaged, 2022 release TTBM, I believe it was called, and I am not sure how good it is like, or bad it is. Don't quote me on that. Not a military, but the point is that it's a 2022 release. So they say we're gonna take it apart and we're gonna see who supplied what because they are going to take apart and see what are the new suppliers of the like the scopes, the electronics and so on, because we know that it's a lot of European, sometimes American producers that are just going through third powers. So I really hope that getting this tank now and taking it apart and seeing who the suppliers are will help put pressure on these companies to make sure that they're selling not to Russia. But I mean that was the name of the game, Russia, because recent reports showing that Russia has returned to the pre-war import levels, which is just ludicrous.
Yeah, and remaining on tanks, if I may, Georgie, again, to go back to the Wikipedia list of what the US has, 8,848 Abrams M1 Abrams tank. So, yeah, they're going to be the different levels of those tanks and whatnot. But I mean, the UK has like a few hundred tanks. We're just about to upgrade them, so we have something called the Challenger 2, which I'm sure most people know about, and that will be upgraded to Challenger 3. But that'll be taking the Challenger 2 chassis and just whacking a new turret on top. But that means we have 79 Challenger 2 left over. Well, I don't understand why they were designed and made for this conflict, right? Why don't we just give them, what are they? No one's going to invade the UK. And if they do, we've got Article 5. So, like, all 79 Challenger 2s should be going straight to Ukraine. Now, I don't even know, we've given 14 Challenger 2s, but I am under the impression, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, that we've actually given 22. So that is good. And I wonder how much equipment America's given, the US have given, without admitting that they've given it. I mean, is that something you're aware of?
No, but I'm aware of something else. There was this secret document leak, the Teixeira leak, when he went on Discord to show off to his
Yeah.
buddies how big his. Instead of just posting like his penis pictures, he decided to post some secret documents. So during that exchange, people obviously discussed the documents a lot. But what I saw the framework. I saw the framework of working, and the framework of working was Ukraine setting out. That's like, okay, we're planning an operation. We want this to be a land operation. We want these resources to be available in the operation. We want this many brigades. We want this many units. We want this many stuff to be prepared. And then the allies and people that are supporting Ukraine are starting to work to supply and meet the required goals specified operation. So I think we will see for a couple of months basically just restocking and repopulation of existing promises to help support the existing operation that is having until this until this counteroffensive operation ends, and then Ukraine says, okay, next step, we have a new setup for the battlefield. This is our next step. This operation will require us to have this many units. This operation will require us to have this many infantry fighting vehicles. This operation will require us to have that many airframes. Let's see if we can you meet this? And then the people start negotiating, talking. They set out a delivery outline, and they start meeting that delivery outline. So I believe at some point during last year, at first Ukraine was receiving very chaotic all of these deliveries, like what's being delivered. Someone delivered artillery, someone delivered some just ammunition, someone delivered helmets. It was very, very unstructured. I believe around the winter time, like the last autumn winter, is when the big switch happened to a more structured framework. And that framework, we will see if, especially when Ukraine executes their main thrust of the counteroffensive, we will see if the framework works. Because the successful counteroffensive will also show that Ukraine can estimate the resources. It will show that Ukraine can estimate and plan. And that means that the next planning period, the next operation for scheduling, will allow the allies to basically meet the expectations, and that's when we're going to start seeing again more significant preparation of Ukrainian brigades for growing the capabilities of the Ukrainian military.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's probably a lot more structured than we give it credit for being. Because these things aren't easy to sort out when you're taking equipment anywhere. I mean, someone was telling me I've got a tank commander friend who was telling me how much ahead of time they had to sort things out for going into Iraq. Like literally 6 months ahead, they were like, okay, these things are in place. And so when you hear on the news, oh, they're going to give this or do that, that's probably 6 months previous that's been decided. And so there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into the logistics chains and how these things work. So absolutely. What are your thoughts? I mean, you mentioned the counteroffensive, obviously. What do you think the primary objective of the counteroffensive will be, particularly in the south?
Cutting the land bridge. I'm pretty sure that's the goal. The rest is a nice like cherry on top. So it basically to put it like, what would be the counteroffensive goal? I would love to share something, but I don't know how to share. But if you have map, do you have a map maybe by your
Yeah,
hand?
yeah, I can share that. I can share that.
Let me also expand this to my chat a little bit so they understand what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna move your picture a bit and
Does that map help?
uh, oh no, wrong one, wrong one. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just expanding. Yeah, this map helps. Can you zoom in into the southern part? Is it possible?
Yeah, yep. It
So
only
where?
zooms in so far. It only zooms in
Okay,
that far. Is that all right?
okay. So there is actually this is perfect. So you see in the
From A to B, their equipment. And without that, they had to rely on trucks. Well, they started the war with something like 4,000 trucks, where apparently the US, in a similar situation, would have used 100,000 trucks or would have had 100,000 trucks. So there's a really massive difference between what the US capabilities are, capacity is for logistics on the road, and what the Russians have. So being forced at the beginning of the war, as it were, to use the roads when it was all very muddy, there was a lot of rain, so on and so forth. This caused a huge problem for the Russians, and they never really recovered from that. The initial logistic issues were a massive challenge. So then forward wind to where we are now, and you are seeing the Ukrainians hit the Russian railway lines consistently up and down the whole of the country, really. And in fact, we're seeing partisan activity within Russia hit railway lines within Russia, which is super important. But yesterday we saw a diesel locomotive getting taken out in the occupied territories. I forget exactly where. The significance of that is that most of the railways the railways um, in Ukraine are electrified railway systems, right? So that means that you kind of the diesel locomotives have been sidelined and they're not really used anymore, and they use the overhead electric cables, but they are quite easy to disrupt. So the Ukrainians have over time had to get, I think, diesel locomotives being used more widely so that they can overcome that issue. But if you're seeing a diesel locomotive getting taken out in the occupied territories of Russia, then you have an indication that the Russians are using diesel locomotives, and the reason they're using diesel locomotives, arguably, is because the Ukrainians have been hitting consistently electrification of the rail network in the occupied territories. So I think that one little bit of news, partisans have blown up a diesel locomotive, is actually really important and indicative of the situation behind the lines, and it shows that the Russians could be in trouble. Anyway, are you back, Georgie?
Yeah, I'm back, and I'm
You're
back to
muted,
my stream.
by
Oh,
the
am
way.
I muted? What? I'm back, and
Um,
I'm back on my stream. Let me just quickly get a map for my audience, because they didn't hear anything. Basically, whenever I try to enlarge your profile, basically my stream crashed, and people haven't seen anything since then. So let me just
oh,
kind of
right.
drop it here, and I'll just explain. I'm sorry for your stream that they have to listen to this again. So guys, on my stream, there is the map. Here you can see Volnovakha, and here you can see this white line. This one is the like a rail that is going on top of the major hill. Everything that is south of this rail is downhill. So whenever Ukraine controls this rail, and then everything is downhill up to Mariupol. That's it. That's a total control of Ukraine, and there is no major connection. Like maybe some equipment sometime Russia can get somewhere sneak in, but there is like it's not to the scale that Russia needs. And whenever the Crimean bridge is taking out, that's it. There is no connection. Everything to the left will be isolated. So there we go. Now we catch up, and just want to say very very shortly that we received the some of the donations. We received some of the super chats. I will read them at the end of this, so don't worry, guys. We'll get back to it.
Actually, I may have been corrected. So one of my viewers has said, the official Ken said, freight locomotives are diesel, and passenger trains are more electric. Military equipment is moving on diesel. So actually, my speculation there could just be completely wrong, and that's why I love putting my thoughts out there, because when I'm wrong, I get corrected by people who know much more about these things than I do. Nonetheless, the overall point is that knackering the Russians' ability to move stuff on rail networks is massively important, and that can be helped hugely by partisan activity, not just by hitting HIMARS. But Volnovakha has been consistently hit, and that is close to the front line, so it's within HIMARS range, and that means it's been particularly vulnerable. So you've seen that get hit, you've seen Ilovaisk get hit a number of times, which is behind Donetsk city, a number of these places. Then if we're going to go down to Crimea, Jankoy, which is a real rail hub, as well as having a number of military bases and whatnot there. So they are doing their very best to hit these. With regard to Kerch, though, Georgie, you said that's going to get hit, and I thought that initially, but I think it was Sun Tzu that said, if your enemy is trying to retreat, build them a golden bridge. And so there's a theory that's been put out recently that actually the Ukrainians won't hit Kerch Bridge if they want the Russians to get out of Dodge as quickly as possible.
Have you seen
Although then,
Budanov? Have you seen Budanov? Like, I'm sorry that the theory.
yeah,
Have you
yeah,
seen Budanov? Have you seen his eyes? You're telling me that this man will not trap a bunch of Russians to play around
that's
with.
true.
So,
That
I mean,
could be
just
true.
like I understand the theory and Westerns trying to rationalize it and so on, but like, have you seen Budanov? It's just like, have you
Well,
looked into that man's eyes?
so I've got a bit of a hybrid speculation that actually they'll take out the railway bridge, but not the road bridge. So that will then trap military movement a little bit more, but allow Russian entities to get out, civilians to get out. Um, what do you think about uh, Crimea, as far as what they will do, what the Ukrainians will do if they get to the coast? Will they go as far as Crimea, and what happens if they get to the kind of the Isthmus, Perekop, maybe Hedichensk? What do you think?
Sure. The biggest trouble right now is the big, how to say, ammonia storage facility in Armyansk. Armyansk is like when right there on the border, like on the left side of that, the what is it called, the isthmus? I don't know. Like yeah,
There,
that's the Armyansk, and in there's like
yeah.
a big storage. Like it's about 200, I believe, 200 tons or even more of ammonia. It's a lot. When that thing is blown up, I'm not Lithuanian, by the way, I'm Latvian, but thanks. Almost there, almost there. Yes. So if that thing is blown up, there's going to be a major cloud that's going to cover, and basically all the land becomes very toxic. Like getting through that land will require like a chemical protection gear. It is possible, don't get me wrong, like there's nothing impossible for military to do. It's all about just like adapting to it. But it's going to be a major problem for Ukraine, without even going the post the war consequences. So we will get in the situation where Russia most probably going to blow this up. It's going to contaminate all the land basically around that isthmus, like Crimea, non-Crimea, and Ukraine will be stopped in that track, so they will not be able to enter it. If not, if Ukraine will be able to neutralize it, maybe special forces, maybe something else, if it's not going to be blown up, then we get stuck 1 and 2. It's going to depend on how well the offensive is going. If when the main thrust comes and then Russians are starting collapsing, and the collapsing is basically panic, and then basically on the shoulders of the retreating army, Ukraine just kind of pierces through, because I mean, you're showing the perfect map. You see that around Jankoy, it's like right south of it. There is basically just one defense line. After that, it's just free. Like there is nothing there. There is no fortifications in Crimea. There is no defense positions. And history, I've specifically looked at the Crimea and how Crimea was held. Firstly, it was never held. Every time there was an army that says we're going to take Crimea, they took Crimea, and 99% whenever they went past that initial thrust into the Crimea, everything else just fallen apart. So there was no kind of major defensive positions after that. So point is, if the collapse of Russians is fast and Ukraine is able to enter that initial um point of entry, just get past it while the Russians are running, cool. Then we get Crimea this summer. If not, then probably Ukraine will stop at around entry. It will isolate Crimea and it will do the what General Bat suggests, making Crimea untenable for Russians, because it's going to
That's my
become,
opinion. Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
going to
that's what I
become
think will be.
completely like I don't know, like a shooting practice for Ukrainians. Whatever they did with the northern part of Kherson and north of the river, they're just going to do the same thing with Crimea. They're just going to completely bombard the shit of anything that has anything to do with military power.
And the whole point, really, the whole point of Crimea for the Russians is Sevastopol, so that they need a deep water, warm water port. So without, I mean, I'm sorry, my viewers will have heard me say this a number of times, but the whole reason Russia is in Syria, the whole reason they're in Syria and supporting the Assad regime is because they have access to a port in the Mediterranean. That's a warm water port. Without that, they don't get access to the Mediterranean other than through Sevastopol. So Sevastopol is super important because they can get protection by having their ships moored in the port. It's a deep water port and it's a warm water port, so it doesn't freeze. All of Russia's other ports in the Russian mainland, other than in the Black Sea, are cold water ports that freeze. So this is super important. But if you can hang around here and hammer Sevastopol, as they kind of are doing with drones, aerial drones and naval drones, then actually you make it untenable for them in Sevastopol. Sorry, I was pointing at the wrong place there. And then they're having to move their ships to Novorossiysk. And already the utility of Crimea is being compromised, and Ukraine are forcing Russia's hand.
Yeah, absolutely. There's only one kind of correction that I would do. You said that Russia needs this for the warm water port. The only thing Russia needs is to get out of Ukraine. That's what
Well,
Russia needs. That
of
let's be
course,
clear with that.
yeah, I would say needs from their point of view, of course.
But that's from their
From
point of view, like
yeah.
because like
Oh,
they're
right.
not winning this war. Like everything else, right? Because let's be very clear. Whatever we're discussing right now is just is a convulsions, like a death person, or half death or whatever you call it. It's like it's just convulsing in agony and agonizing in his death stench, because right now the war is lost. There is no saving it. Like the support for Ukraine is just growing. The production capabilities of the West is growing. The support for Ukraine is not waning, and that was kind of the only back that Russia had, and it blew it. And so I'm pretty sure that after we see this offensive will completely stomp the Russians, it will achieve its targets. I'm completely certain about it just by seeing how initial scouting parties essentially are having a success and reaching the Russian and executing on their objectives, because this is something that people don't discuss for some reason. They say like, oh, they're just moving into the Russian controlled territory, and but why don't they move in like with big numbers? Well, because they're executing on their objectives. They're not just moving in for the fun of it. And we see Ukrainian army executing on their objectives. So whenever the time comes, the main thrust, all of the, like, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 vehicles will thrust in that spot where Russia is the weakest. We will see a big change of the Russian positions in this war. Uh, because right now they think they're having it bad, but they're going to have it even worse very soon.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, right? I wrote an article back in April the 4th, 2022 on Only Sky, right? So I wrote an article for them saying, "Where to now, Putin? Because there is no way you can win." And I'm sorry I've bored my own viewership with this before. But basically, what I said in April 2022. So my thesis is this, Georgie. Interesting to see if you agree or not. So Russia did start a special military operation, right? So they went into Ukraine with an SMO in mind. They wanted to get rid of the Zelensky government, overthrow them within 3 days, and then spend 2 weeks clearing it up. And we've got lots of evidence to support that, plans and parade uniforms and the rationing for only 5 days and all this kind of stuff, right? So that's what they planned. But we go back to having the wrong information, and Putin just garbage in, garbage out. You make a bad decision based on the garbage information you got. So it turns out the Ukrainians didn't want them there. They put up massive resistance. So then the Russians were stuck in Ukraine with kind of an army. Accidentally in a war. So that it started as an SMO and accidentally became a war. And then, as they were in the country with an army, their objectives completely had to change, but they didn't have a plan B. There was no other objective. So then they're like, oh, we better invade Kyiv then. And then they couldn't do that. And then they didn't have an army to be able to take over a country that size with 44 million people in it. And then there was literally whatever their objectives they could put out, they couldn't achieve them. There was no way they could win. So I wrote this back in April the 4th, 2022. And do you know what? It holds up completely now. There is still no way they can win. And as you're absolutely right, they need to get out, and that's from their point of view. They need to get out.
Yeah, and this is something that I've talked about. Like they're now right now in complete sunk cost fallacy. They are a gambler that is so deep in debt that just cannot stop. They're just like, okay, no, we just need to improve our position. We just need Ukraine like to fail. We just need to take Donbass. We just need to get something like, for our side. And then things gonna get like, and then we can try to squeeze and like weasel stuff out. Like just wait, my luck will come. It's a complete like gambler addict approach to things, right? In Putin, and people's like, oh yeah, but Putin will not this. Like Putin is like this great planner, great military strategy. He's not. He's been opportunist for his whole life. Like you follow his career and how it developed is literally just him like having opportunities and just making more or less like decisions that allowed him to do this. And then everyone else just looked at him and perceived him as this some kind of demigod that's telling where everything is, that is able to twist and turn European powers how he wishes. Well, he was actually doing nothing. He was just like being there, and we basically were telling to ourselves how big and scary the Russia is, while giving Russia infinite amounts of money that it spent just to corrupt our own political systems and send money to the powers that opposed and divided us. And we essentially were paying for the service of complete disarray in our own societies. And we considered there was some kind of a major Russian strategy. It wasn't. It was just like Putin is like, yes, this is the thing that we're doing. This is my opportunity. Everyone is afraid of me. Goody goody. When he actually is a bully. So whenever like as any bully, whenever someone actually hits him in the face, then suddenly bully goes, it's like that's not unfair. That's not very nice. And it's like, well, no,
Yeah, because all he has is a red button threat. So he's only got the nuke threat, really. Yes, he can. What was great about the hydrocarbons threat is that actually, and whoever blew up Nord Stream is kind of irrelevant. Germany, hats off to Germany, right? Because they weaned themselves off Russian hydrocarbons much quicker than even they were expecting, let alone everyone else. And Europe has weaned themselves off Russian hydrocarbons. I'm sure the US LNG, liquefied natural gas exporters, are pretty happy about this. But actually, so that takes away one of the cards that Putin did have. So he's only left with a nuke threat. And if everyone's like, well, you're not going to pull the nuke, you're not going to press that button. We know that now. You've been told very clearly by the US and other allies that if you do that, your like navy will be wiped out within 5 minutes or whatever the threats are. But I believe the counter attack would be conventional, not nuclear. So that he's not going to do that, and that leaves him as a bully with empty words.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, this is where we're getting into this whole idea, or who he is, how he gets information, yada yada yada. It's basically where you said it all. I just want to respond very quickly because some people are concerned, and this comment has been appearing from time to time. Is that there is a concern that Russia will bomb the Kiev dam? Like, so there is a Kiev, and right kind of north of Kiev, it's something that they call the Kiev Sea. It's like a big dam that is holding a lot of water just north of Kiev. And the answer to that, no, I'm not afraid because of what dams are. Because this dam that got blown up just didn't got blown up because there was a missile that struck that dam. It was Russians that put the explosives in. Like, so we now had the multiple confirmations that something is up. Obviously the conclusive evidence can only be presented once there is an access to the dam, but right now there is plenty of evidence that suggests it wasn't just a uncontrolled collapse. There's like just too much. I first came out my video, for example, of dam. I said that the main theory is the explosion, but I believe that there might be a controlled not controlled but uncontrolled self demolition of the dam. That it was just too much
Yes.
water.
So
And
yeah,
I
I'd
really,
agree.
really, I will just, and I would just say that I thought that it was the case, but people started really making good arguments and explaining that, like, you cannot just have dam collapse in three places, and that there was like additional evidence that there was like additional destruction. That this dam is so massive, like you cannot just have water just break a dam of that size in three places, even if it's cracked. And that's why I'm not afraid about the Kiev dam, because a
That's a
missile striking
really
the
good
dime will not destroy it.
That's a really good point, actually. Really good point, because I'm with you. I think it's a hybrid explanation. I changed my mind, and I did two whole videos on or two large parts of my videos on this, which is there was a lot of deterioration of the dam, given that they're only using one or three sluice gates, so on and so forth. All the stuff that other people have talked about ad infinitum. And yes, it would have been you've got issues with kind of that self destruction. Plus, you put explosives in there, blow it up, and blah blah blah. Neither of those things are happening with the Kyiv dam, as in you don't have explosives, you don't have deterioration of the dam itself, and you've got patriot systems around Kyiv. Kyiv, nothing's getting into Kyiv, I don't think, or at least not easily. So yeah, I'd completely agree with you on that.
I wouldn't be sure
I
that there are protection of the dam with the Patriots, because Patriots, they cover only specific areas where the key buildings are, obviously.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think it's if it's an electric
I want.
plant, that then there is obviously, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I want to mention Budanov. So you mentioned Budanov earlier. I wonder what your thought on this. So most people would have seen the shh video, right? Which has lots of people going shh, talking about operational security, and at the end they have two jets flying, and you're like, okay, that's pretty cool. But then there's this video. Now, in the news, was it 2 days ago? I think it's referring to June the 7th, though. The Japanese government changed their rules. So the Japanese, since World War II, have been a self-defense force, not an army, and they have a defense industry that doesn't export, right? They've just changed their laws on June the 7th to mean that they can now export. Was it a coincidence that when Budanov does his video, that there is indeed a Japanese flag? There are two flags in that, a Ukrainian flag and a Japanese flag. And you have this video where he is just sitting there and there's silence and it just zooms in on him, but you have that Japanese flag. What do you say to that?
I think he's just fucking with you. that's that's pretty much answer. It's like, obviously, like there is a closer cooperation with with Japanese. They're providing humanitarian aid to Ukraine, of course, but people taking apart this Budanov clip is. I mean, Budanov is a troll. Like, he
Yeah,
loves
true,
fucking with
true.
people. So and like, don't get me wrong. Like, getting to at 37, being a general and like head of the intelligence, that's something, says something about the person. Like, let's be very clear. Like, in a warring country at 37, be a general, be in a head office, a head of intelligence apparatus of a warring country, and pushing aside supposedly one of the big great powers. That is just something. Like, the guy has balls, the guy has brains, he has everything. But this one, I don't feel that it was like something important. It's a promo clip. It's something for him to to have fun. It's like you want to hear dark stories, like when it's scary about Budanov. He's not going to tell you about this. We already know this, like because the scary part was like when around Kharkiv he went in, he took in Kraken unit, and he personally directed them to fuck up Russians. That's scary.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, yeah, either or. I mean, either Japan are going to be able to provide some meaningful assistance militarily to Ukraine, or Budanov is just screwing with you. And whenever you see him talk in interviews, he's absolutely fascinating. He's just perfect for the job of in charge of intelligence, because there's all sorts of things going on in layers behind that. And when he's speaking, he speaks in that particular way. What are your thoughts on his claims about while it's still warm, the Ukrainians will get into Crimea? Back to the
I
Crimea
mean,
question.
obviously plans were adjusted. Like we know that Ukrainian plans were adjusted because delivery schedule was slow. And that's not really a bad secret, the big secret. Like the West was just slow. The promises of the West were slow. Budanov explained and said that by the end of spring we will be in Crimea, and I think he really meant what he said, because everything is just saying that this is a very potentially possible scenario. We're seeing how things are developing. We're seeing some of the units of Russians running away already, and this is not even a main thrust. It's just like a scouting units. So there is going to be this weakness, like because Ukraine, like when people say it's like okay, but there is like this 400 long kilometer line in the south. Yes, but Ukraine just needs what like 5-10 kilometer wide gap, and then they're just going to pour through it. And after that, there is nothing. After that, there's just, okay, maybe open field tank battles, whatever, maybe some minefields, sure. But it's still like there is no fortifications, there is nothing there. And the south is an open field. It's like the same way that Russia took over the south very, very fast is basically like a Uno switcheroo card. Like now, like that just is a turnaround card
Yeah.
because it's an open field. It's a step. It's perfect for tank and like any kind of fast moving vehicle combat. It's very hard to contain. So once Ukrainians get past that rail line that we just spoke earlier,
Mm.
it's gonna be very much a game over. And I think Budanov definitely has ideas on how they get there.
But some people have been really positive about how Ukraine are able we should be able to overcome the defenses, and I was always a bit more cautious. So, but I don't know if your audience will surely know Thomas Tyner on Twitter, who has a lot of opinions on these things, and he was like, "Well, technically, Ukrainians can easily overcome the defenses, and this is how you'd overcome the Dragon's Teeth, and how you'd overcome the trenches, and how you'd overcome the minefields, and this is a piece of kit." And then we see in the opening days those three mine clearing vehicles blown up and blah blah blah. And then my claim is that actually these defenses, they've had months and months to put these in place. They are meaningful defenses, and they will slow down the Ukrainians, and they will be a challenge for the Ukrainians. There were particularly the minefields, as far as I'm concerned. That, as you can see from this map, maybe your viewers might not be able to see, I don't know, clearly enough, but you've got all the defenses here. And where the Ukrainians have had success up near Velika Novosilka, there aren't those defenses. They actually take place behind a place called Staromnivka, which is just down here. Once they cross that sort of boundary, you start getting the defenses. But where they came a cropper around Orikhiv or south of Orikhiv, that's potentially where those defenses were and those minefields. So, what's your idea on the challenge that the defenses will provide?
Well, thankfully, it's not my idea. I don't need to give ideas
Yeah,
because, as I said, I'm not a
no,
military expert. But I
you're
listen
an
to
armchair
yeah,
general, though.
yeah, yeah, armchair general for sure. But as I said, I listen to a lot of the experts and what they're saying. Experts that have proven their essentially like worth. Like I'm not sure if you've heard that before this counteroffensive started, I actually put up money that I would need to pay up to Ukrainian military if it wouldn't start from my own pocket, not the what I'm earning here on YouTube or whatever. But That's charge, yes. But the point is, like, they were again precise. The analysts that were saying and reporting to me the information are precise, and I'm very happy to say that they are very, very precise. And what they're saying is basically that defenses not really the problem. Defenses all of these trenches and so on. It's going to take 20, 25 minutes to get the dirt over, get clear the mines, get through. The problem is the army. So a lot of the initial distrust was to expose the Russian military, to start hammering them with the artillery, to start breaking them apart, to start making sure that whenever there is a thrust, that there is not going to be a coherent units that are going to meet them. And this is happening right now. So people saying, like, why Ukrainian military is not advancing? They don't need to. They exposed, like, obviously they are advancing closer to the actual breakthrough lines as much as they can, but they actually don't need to. If they already exposed the Russian defensive positions, and right now they're being hammered day after day after day, same spot, same people sitting in the same trenches day after day after day, 777, Storm Shadow, all of their artillery draining down on their heads. Then when suddenly one of these days there is about 100 or 200 armored columns, like not columns, but like vehicles that are coming their way, these people are already, I'm not sure how much of them will be alive and how much of them will be ready to fight. So all of these trenches can be cleared. Mines can be freed. What is the danger is the Russian military. And what Ukraine is trying to do is trying to get rid of all of the dangers of the Russian military. It is trying to make sure that Russia engages their reserves as fast as possible, so there is no mobile reserves in the back that can help stop the oncoming onslaught. And this is the plan. This is the game plan. It's not a big secret. It's kind of already on the table, and like Ukraine knows it and Russia knows it. And it's basically who blinks first game. Except Russia is tended to blink a lot during this war. And the
Yeah.
eye is already
Okay.
kind of blue and black.
So, I mean, what? Okay, so many things I want to ask you about. So, talking about like how. Okay, first of all, how confident are you that Ukraine will prevail, say in this counteroffensive? And it depends what the objectives are, and you can only measure success against the objectives. And of course, we don't know the objectives, so there is all that to consider as well. But are you? I guess I'm trying to ask: are you in a generally optimistic mood?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like so far, even the initial thrust it has been incredible. The overreactions by the Russians, the reports from everything that I'm hearing is really, 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 really good. We've seen what Russia has prepared, and obviously the air power is the problem. And this is how Ukraine we'll see how Ukraine will adapt. Right now, there is not a lot of action, mostly because there is a big thunderstorm, like multi-day thunderstorm, that is happening basically as we speak in that area. So it hinders a lot of progress for Ukrainians. But generally speaking, I see that Ukraine knows what they're talking about. If they said that they will achieve their targets, and it seems they will, I have the full confidence that they will be able to do so. Will it be as spectacular as ending the war in Russia in Crimea? Probably not. But I'm pretty sure that the major important strategic targets that will actually improve Ukrainian positions. Maybe people on the online will be saying it's like, Ukraine didn't even reach the, like, for example, I told you about the chain, right, of this railway and
Mm.
so on. Strategically super important. When people, for example, Ukraine takes that top position, people's like, oh, Ukraine didn't even, for example, reach the shores. Wow, what a failure. But actually, strategically, Ukrainian position is incredible. So I believe that the strategic objectives that Ukraine has set out will be achieved. There is also a positive scenario, where Russians are actually running, because we see that morale of the Russians is not that great, especially if they're being hammered for like 3 weeks by the 777 artilleries and sitting halfway.
Yeah, that's one of those things where the people talked about Russians capitulating and routing, and before I kind of dismissed that as being too optimistic, but actually, we have seen that a number of times. We've seen that a number of videos coming out, both from Zaporizhia and one from the Donbass Canal up in Bakhmut over the last couple of days, where they've like been hammered with artillery and just done a runner. And you can empathize with that. I mean, there's a lot of mind games going on. We don't know all the things that are happening. You know, with regards to the psyops that are affecting these troops. And so, yeah, there is a really significant non-zero possibility of the Russians like routing, and that would really help the Ukrainians, obviously. But talking about the positivity that you have there, where I was going with that is, do you ever have to check your biases? Do you ever have to think about, am I both in curating your own sources and wondering whether you're getting the correct information and giving people the correct information, and also with getting carried away with optimism? Do you ever think, hang on, yeah, how do you deal with bias, and whether you are a victim, like we all are, perhaps to our own biases?
My thing, I don't care about the biases. I don't look at it.
Okay.
I don't like.
I had a feeling you were going to say
Yeah,
that.
because people put too much attention on people, especially when they're saying, "Oh, I provide only objective information," or try to look at both sides and so on. What I'm looking at is data. What I want to see is predictions, results. The last year, and why I'm feeling so confident, I refined my pool of analysts. I looked at what predictions they're making, and I looked what the situation on the battlefield when they were saying that. And I noted that, and I put them in my little notebook that I said. So what I was looking is predictive powers. I looked at
Mm.
let me just say, there might be people that are outside of my pool that are like, for example, pro-Russians and whatnot. But so far, a lot of pro-Russians has shown that their predictive power is kind of poor. And what I've seen is that the analysts that I'm following, that their predictive power and understanding of the situation is quite good. That the predictive power that they're having, while not always, very often
Oh,
is.
hello.
Okay, am I dead again, chat? Am I dead again?
I think we're back. Yeah. I think we just had a
Yeah.
funny 5 seconds there.
But that's it. So I don't care about what they say, right? I like data. I'm a guy
Yeah.
that's like nerd and so on. So for me, whenever a person makes a statement, people look at it as like, what is the statement? What is the shading like, and so on. What I'm interested in is like, what is the fact that he's stating? What is the testing factor for that statement? And when should I come back to that statement to make sure that it came through? For example, for Budanov, he stated that this counteroffensive will be successful and that we will enter Crimea. Okay, it's a good testing factor. Previously, why I trust Budanov, and I know why it was like we've heard that it was delayed, so I gave Budanov some leeway. But before he was said last October, he was telling that by February this year, we will see that Russians are having problems with ammunition. We see come February, and Russians are having trouble with ammunition. Russians are having real trouble with ammunition. They were really having troubles. One of the major things that they were not advancing during their winter offensive, because when they realized the winter offensive is not going well, they put a taboo on that, and they understood that they need to start preparing for the Ukrainian counterpunch. So they started stockpiling some of the ammunition. So a lot of the ammunition that
which
is
is
there.
which is definitely what Ukraine were doing as well. So when Ukraine were being accused of having shell hunger, I was saying at the time, is almost certainly going to be an element of, they are stockpiling a lot of their resources that are being given ready for this, because they're using it by all accounts quite liberally down in the Zaporizhia region, which they have to have a successful counteroffensive. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted.
No. But that's it. So that's how I don't like. That's why I don't care about bias, because I'm not an academic. I support a very specific force here. I want one specific party to win. I am as biased as it gets. I fucking want Russians out of Ukraine today, or even better, tomorrow, yesterday, and I'm not afraid to say it. And I don't feel that people that say, "Oh, I'm just a neutral observer to this," are honest. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
And you can say this like, okay, I'm analyzing sources from both sides, like OSINT, so intelligence, and I approve of that. Like people want to be clear on what they're saying. Fair enough. Maybe my sources are mostly pro-Ukraine. Fair enough, but they're producing results that I need.
That's such a good answer. I mean, like with yourself, I'm very clear with my viewers that I am pro-Ukraine. Morally, I don't know that you. God, as a philosopher, I'd be in a real real bind if I was trying to find a way to support Russia. There's activities are so morally abhorrent, and it's just not, it's not an argument you can win. So I am vehemently pro Ukraine, but I also want to make sure that I get an accurate appraisal of what's going on. So I do look at the other side just to say, okay, they're saying this, these guys are saying this. Both sides will be spinning to some extent, but as you say, these guys. So when we look at the general staff figures for the Ukrainian losses that come out on a daily basis and compare them to the Russian MOD claims, where they've claimed that Ukraine have lost like 450 airframes, it's like they only start the war with 124. Like, you are out by such a ridiculous margin that that is enough for me to just reject everything you claim. And I've got a lot more, you know, a lot more rationale, decent reasoning to think that the Ukrainians are telling at least a more accurate picture than the Russians here. But what's your idea of where of what the Russian objective actually now is? Like, do you think, because we hear a lot from the Russian soldiers on the ground are saying we don't know why we're here, we don't know what the objective is, because I don't think there is one, and I don't think Putin actually has one, because it's all just I don't know. What do you think the winning for Putin would be, or what's his off ramp if there is one?
I mean, like, let's be very clear. Putin has been offered every single off ramp possible. Every single, like, over the last year, every single off ramp that was offered to Putin, even lately, there was like oh, maybe Russia ready for some negotiations. They said like, oh yeah, sure, just Ukraine needs to give us three more regions, and then we're gonna be start ready for negotiations as a precondition. So there has been off ramps ready for Russia whenever they wanted. Like, there has been plenty of fools and idiots that are ready to provide any kind of off ramp for Putin if only he would ask. He would ask, and there will be someone running. Like, I don't know, either Berlusconi. Well, he cannot run now anymore because dead people don't run unless they're Russians. But yeah, so there's off ramp whenever he wants, but he doesn't, because he is in his loop of like, oh, things are pretty bad, but I'm not going to stop right now. I want things to be better. So and the military, I think Vlad Vexler, I'm not sure if you follow him.
Yeah.
I disagree with him on many topics, but that doesn't take away from his academic background, doesn't take away from his knowledge of the Russians and so on. So he is very, very good at explaining that. I think that even Russian society and Russian military does not know what they're doing. They're doing things because they're doing things. That's pretty much the kind of the whole thesis. That's it. Like, they are doing because a person above him said him that they should do it. If a person above you says that you should go wash these rocks, then you should go wash these rocks. That's pretty much where the Russian military is, and the Russian population in general.
Yeah, that is, it is a really bleak outlook for the Russians, yeah, and but yeah, I can't see that it's any other way really. So talking about then a successful Ukrainian war. So let's say Ukraine prevail. What one of the trickiest things for me to get my head around is working out what would go on with Crimea and Donbass. I think it'd actually be easier for Crimea, more difficult for Donbass. Do you have any thoughts on, you know, where you know what happens after a war is concluded?
I mean, the life slowly returns um, to these dehumanized areas of Ukraine that Russia turned into criminal enclaves, like on the east, or a complete uh, military colonial, neo-colonial pen, like in the south, where native population of Tatars are being oppressed, where their culture is being denied, where the houses of theirs being taken away, where the houses of locals that, for example, were found out that they were supporting Ukrainians were thrown out to the streets, or even more, into prison, and then some kind of officers and military commanders would came in and take their apartments and houses. Normal life would start returning. there, decolonization and decriminalization of the areas, the actual normal life. That's what's going to happen. The same that was happening in Kherson until Russia. The only thing that is disrupting normal life in Ukraine, the only thing is Russia. Everything else, like there was no problem in Crimea. There was no problem in the East. Everything that is happening, all the suffering, including the supposedly pro-Russian speakers, is purely because of Russia, because of Putin, because he wanted to do something for his, I don't know, CV for career letter at the end of his life. It's like, I did shit. That's his statement. That's his. I don't know whether he thought himself a big glorious Tsar of New Russia, or whatever he was thinking, but he ruined the life of a lot of people, not just Ukrainians, but supposedly, as they say, Russian speakers on the East. He ruined, and I mean, like, ruined in some cases, but in many cases completely destroyed, because dead people don't feel already the ruinous of their lives. Because the number of people, especially the Russian speakers, supposedly, that he killed in Ukraine is incredible. That person is one of the worst things that can happen, that could have happened to a Russian nation in the 21st century. Supposedly, it's the century of prosperity, the century of enlightenment, the century where we're talking about the artificial intelligence, where we're talking about maybe potentially reaching out of the space. We are having this backwards power, technologically redundant, that lives off of the resource of exploiting its own population to just spread misery to other countries that just want to live peacefully.
I think his decision to it's one of the worst geopolitical decisions in well, I don't know, certainly living memory. I mean, you could say it's the worst idea in the Second World War and First World War. I'd argue. I mean, it's that r- unwinnable objective and decision that he made that is just an absolute shocker. I think the problem with Donbass and Crimea is that over time, since 2014, Russia has been able to ship in, train in a load of Russian civilians who are now. So when if you had to do a referendum in those places, that it would be completely biased by the fact that all the pro-Ukrainians have left there because of persecution and so on and so forth, and being under occupied rule. So you'd have to really carefully work out what to do with all those effectively Russian civilians left in these places. You would hope that many of them would leave voluntarily, but it will be a challenge going forwards, and I think Donbass would be more of a challenge than Crimea. That's just my personal opinion. Um, Talking about Putin, then I guess one of the sort of last questions I had for you myself was, what do you think Putin's future is, and what do you think most like? Okay, two parts. What would be the most beneficial thing to happen from your point of view, but what's most likely to happen as well?
Hague, that would be the most beneficial. The most likely, potentially a death by some kind of infighting.
So
But
do you think there's enough people in there who would be in a position to do that?
not now, not right now, but they will be there.
Yeah.
They will be there. They're already starting there. There's already some. There is the pro-Ukrainian fighters. There is some of the internal conflicts. It's just there is still some projection of Putin's power there, but as the war will conclude, it will wane significantly. Russia will relive a lot of the horrible years in the future, in the coming decades. It's going to be a big challenge. It's going to be a lot of it, like what's going to come out of it. Uh, Democratic powers of Russia have shown their complete inaptitude of dealing with authoritarian regimes. They are detached from reality, and they unfortunately, I'm not sure what they're going to do, but there's going to be some people in Russia that would like to. Maybe once the civil war starts, if it starts, they will take to the streets to protest the civil war. That is a possibility. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting times for Russians. But the most important thing, I believe, that they will be in no position to threaten anyone in the West, at least in any kind of foreseeable future. The most beneficial thing, as I said, is for um, some power to take control in Kremlin, get Putin, put him in a cage, and send him to Hague, and say, okay, please come in, CIA, whatever, and help us rebuild Russia. Then Russia can stay as a single state. Then Russia can stay
Yeah.
as some kind of power, maybe transition to democracy. That is the only kind of where I see some kind of democratic powers coming to power in that kind of sense. I think that was kind of the bet for US, what it like was looking for last year, but I don't feel that they were successful enough to find any kind of pro-democratic power that would be ready to do so. So I believe a more aggressive approach has been kind of not maybe not approved, but at least assumed as a main the play out scenario. Because
I think when you disenfranchise a population so much, politically speaking, when you take away their political power, they become politically apathetic. So actually, there's an awful lot of population, and I'm doing a bit of speculation here, but I think there's an awful lot of the Russian population who are so not used to exercising political power. That they are not involved in politics, that they don't think politically at all. And so Putin does all the work for them, and they are just compliant. And there are more people in the internal security services in Russia than the army. And you add all these things up together, and there isn't the potential to replace Putin with a functioning democratic like system and people. And so I think that will be a challenge going forward. You can more easily see a more fervent nationalistic leader like Prigozhin or someone else coming to power than you can see Putin being replaced by like some kind of liberal democratic rulership.
correct,
Is
because the
that something
Russian
you,
pop.
yeah.
No, you're absolutely correct. And as you said, like the population in Russia, that's the people that are looking up to like what's the man above says, like what's the boss says. So the problems will start when the man above starts questioning, well, who is my man above? So that's when the chain starts being broken. Because right now the man above is Putin for sure. But once some of that man above starts being divided, that's when the Russian population will start splitting because they are answering just to the person that's telling them to do something. And we've seen how apathetic they are. So they're okay like dying despite like they don't even know what they're fighting for, despite what is a just or not just war. They don't care. But it's going to be the same. It's going to be just the same. There's going to be just different people just going to say, "Oh, follow me," and I was like, "Oh, sure, yeah, you're the big man." So the question will be who's going to be the big man. But yes, before we wrap up, I would like to read some of the super chats that I got
Yeah.
just to kind of
Yeah.
say big thanks people for supporting. I want to say thanks to Taz for gifting membership. He's a big very very constant supporter of my channel. And Hill, 5 memberships. Inkboy, thank you so much for €2 donations. Any hopes for the summits of NATO in Vilnius? Um, I hope for a plan of post-war ascension. Like, so most probably it's going to come out as a security guarantees with some kind of confirmation that Ukraine is going to be part of NATO. So I'm hoping for a concrete security guarantees. What about you, Jonathan?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And it's interesting that there's been a lot of talk about the term security guarantees from the what's the group? Anyway, France, Germany, and Poland have been talking about security guarantees. Now that's a particular phrase that means it's like Article 5. That if Ukraine are in trouble, then they would send troops into Ukraine. Now, that's obviously not going to happen now, but there is a long term sustainability to support for Ukraine, which I think those people are doing independently of NATO. But if NATO can put that in place, is very clearly say that okay, even if they're not going to be a member of NATO, then after this war ends in that intervening time period, we can offer them kind of Article 5 equivalents. Is really important. You're also starting to see countries like Germany and Norway offer aid to Ukraine on a long-term sustainable basis. So Norway put X billion dollars into a 5-year plan, and that's really important because that says to Putin, we are in this for the long term, and we're not just saying this. We've literally written out contract, which means we are going to supply military and financial aid to Ukraine for 5 years. Now that is super, super. I mean, that's given me goosebumps. Actually, that's super strong. That is such good messaging to Putin.
Yeah, for sure. Next, OCT, thank you so much. I'm sorry that I got you in trouble, mate, with the arrest Starsky hashtag. Sorry for that. Well, 24 euros. Super grateful. We have two commentators separating truth from BS and granting us all knowledge of what's actually going on. Hoping this will end soon and Russia transitions to democracy. First, like it will end, but with the second one, we just discussed it. It's a big
That's a
question.
tough challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's very little sense. Maybe there's something you want to read from some of your super
Yes,
chats.
I just want to say, thank you to all those who have super chatted. So, Christopher Ellis, thank you for your RONs. I don't know what RONs are, but
I think it's
they are
Romanian
awesome.
lace.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Is it
Peter
lace?
Vinker, awesome. Such a kind person. Jojo, really generous. Thank you very much. Legend in your own life. Sub Hero, thank you so much. My only two YouTube channels I'm a member of. Love to see this collaboration. Slava Ukraine. Hashtag coffee gang. He's wrong. It's always about the tea. We know this. This is just objective truth. And thanks to Lee Bell for the super sticker as well. You're a legend. Always so supportive. All of you. I really appreciate that. And thanks so much to everyone who's tuned into this and hopefully got something out of it. And also, of course, massive thanks to you, Georgie,
Oh,
for enabling
I
this
just
to
need to
happen.
read a couple of more. Sorry, I
Sorry,
just
yeah, yeah, you,
yeah.
yeah, no, yeah.
I need to say thanks. Thanks to Arc Web. Thanks to White Lightning. Really nice. Like, were you somewhere, man? Like White Lightning. I think you disappeared from my channel for a while. Don't know where you've been. Write me a mail. Let's talk. Peter Vinky, thanks so much. Thank you so much too. If the West supplies and tanks and planes, Ukraine can simply use foreign volunteers to use them. Yeah, like the planes especially. Terrence, thanks so much. Reapercast, thanks so much. £20. Holy moly. Pappy Dilling Pappy. Oh my god, I'm butchering the names. I'm sorry. Sorry, Pappy, I'm butchering your name, but I'm gonna call you Pappy. That's good enough, I guess. The Animal, thanks so much. $10. Testament of power of critical thinking. You are by far the best voice of the matter, of Ukrainian matter. From one nerd polymath to another, sending love and support from San Diego, US. Thank you so much. Absolutely. What is it? What was it? The famous last words and fuck you, San Diego, or something like that. Please, people will correct me how to say it correctly. Barbara D, great discussion, absolutely. Tremaine Pryor, please keep up the love streams, absolutely. White Lightning again. Should Ukraine pursue its own nukes if they can get into NATO? Let's come back as the last questions. Captain Halo, thank you so much again for constant support. So nukes, what do you think, Jonathan? Should Ukraine get nukes to kind of round it all up? We started with somewhat nukes, and maybe we're gonna end it with.
It's just one of those like if only history. I mean, proliferation, nuclear proliferation is a big topic, and Ukraine were given security assurances for having their, for giving up their nukes, and you wonder if they still had their nukes, whether any of this would have actually happened. But then I don't know. That's a pretty complex question. Uh, I think if you were to get into NATO, that for me would do a good enough job that you wouldn't need nukes, would be my opinion. If those security guarantees, and we've now seen that NATO or at least allied nations are willing to put their money where their mouth is and their equipment where their mouth is, and that actually this has been a really unified and robust response to Russia, and I think that's given NATO a good test, and NATO has at least somewhat passed that test. And we can always talk about they could have done better and so on and so forth. But I think the need for Ukraine to have nukes should be overcome by decent security guarantees.
For sure. And to be clear, with the San Diego, I was just trying to make a poor impression of the joke from the Anchorman movie. So absolute love to San Diego. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for this amazing stream. I really enjoyed this. It was a very very good talk, actually. Let's meet up sometime again. Thank you so much, chat. Please, everyone, do the YouTube thing. It's doesn't like cost you anything to just go and hit the subscribe button, the like button. Drop by Jonathan's stream. His name is like in blue in the description of this video. You can just go on that, go on the stream. do the YouTube things. It's just nothing. And support Ukraine. Slava Ukraine, you guys. I love you. And from myself, stay classy.
And if I can just say thank you to you, this has been really wonderful. I've really enjoyed this. Thanks to all the super chatters. Thanks to Jojo particularly, and happy birthday to Smith, who's one of my members. Awesome, and let's do this again, mate.
See you guys. See you.
Ta-da.
Bye, chat.